Okay, I think we have at least one special. If I didn't leave anybody out, anybody else that got another special, wave at me. Sister Mary, if you all come on down.
I know you're going through the fire. It's getting hard to stand the heat, but even harder is the wondering, is God's hand still on me? It's lonely in the flames when you're counting down the days of pain. But the potter, he knows the clay, how much pressure it can take, how many times around the wheel, till there's submission to his will. He's planned a beautiful design, but it'll take some fire and time. It's gonna be okay, 'cause the potter, he knows the clay. Friend, I just came through that fire not too very long ago, and looking back I can see why, and that my God was in control. But on the hottest days I'd cry, oh Lord, isn't it about time? But the potter, he knows the clay, and how much pressure it can take, and how many times around the wheel, till there's submission to his will. He's planned a beautiful design, but it'll take some fire and time. It's gonna be okay, 'cause the potter, he knows the clay. He's planned a beautiful design, but it'll take some fire and time. It's gonna be okay, 'cause the potter, he knows the clay.
Amen. Go ahead and open your Bibles to the 8th chapter of the book of Revelation. When I hear that song, and I love that song, puts me in the mood to preach out of Jeremiah chapter 18. I've preached that once here already before, and I threatened to do it again when we was all on lockdown and doing live stream. Never did do it, but I get in the mood. Go read Jeremiah chapter 18 sometime and meditate on it. It'll bless your heart. Potter does know the clay. We are but clay in the hands of the potter. Revelation chapter 8. Now, even though I am going to plan on breezing through this entire chapter very quickly tonight, that does not mean that it will advance us very far in the narrative. The reason for that is we're going to be talking about the trumpet judgments a little bit tonight. And the trumpet judgments, this is a difficult part of Revelation, because we'll have 4 trumpet judgments that are blown here in Revelation chapter 8, 2 of them in Revelation chapter number 9. The 7th one won't be blown until Revelation chapter 11. And the effects of that will not be seen immediately until Revelation chapter 16, which brings on the vial judgments. If I confused you already, you look at me like that blank stare on your face. Don't make fun of me as I stumble and bumble along, trying to kind of piece this together and keep it in some kind of continuity, and at the same time try to explain the timeline, because I'm not the only one that stumbles and bumbles along. When you come to this section, really from Revelation chapter 6 up to Revelation chapter number 19 or so, about everybody I know stumbles and bumbles along, because in between all of these chapters, in between the trumpet judgment, when the last trumpet blows, and which opens up the vial judgments or the bowl judgments, you have several what you call parenthetical chapters. I mean, they look up, they look down, they look back, they look forward, and of course, parenthetical means that they don't advance the narrative any further at all. It just stops, and it will describe something that's either going on in heaven or going on this earth. Sometimes they will even look forward, things that are coming. So I'm not the only one that kind of stumbles and bumbles my way through and trying to keep it in some kind of time frame or a continuity here, chronologically speaking, because these are the difficult chapters. That's why, by the way, that there's so many preachers that will announce with great fanfare that they're going to preach a series through the book of Revelation. And as I told you before, they go like gangbusters through Revelation 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They hit Revelation chapter 6, and they put the brakes on. And then they'll struggle along for a little while, and it won't be long. They'll say, we're going to go somewhere else and study for a while. So it is a difficult section in many ways, but if I lose you now, hopefully I'll pick you back up later on and be able to put it together in a little better fashion later on. Now, you understand that the tribulation period is a period of 7 years. And most Bible scholars divide that up into 2 blocks of 3.5 years each. Now, later on, we'll get to that in more detail. But the first 3.5 years is called the tribulation period. And I'm indebted to Brother Rick Perdue, who watches this out in California. And he'll text me and let me know something where I've messed up or if anything like that. He really doesn't do that, but he did text me last time and said, you didn't point out that there is a great tribulation period. Well, I understand it. I believe that the first 3.5 years, this person's going to come on the scene, and at first he's going to seem like he has all the answers. It's not going to be just a hunky-dory time. It's not going to be a time of peace. It's going to be a time of trouble. But he is going to be the one that's supposed to have all the answers for the first 3.5 years. But it is in the next 3.5 years when Satan kind of plays his trump card, this Superman that he empowers in our way of thinking. He is the beast. He is the false prophet. and he's going to take charge of this earth. That's hence my title, A World Ruled by Satan. In the seal judgments, we have a world run by man. God is going to let man see just how bad it can get when he backs off and lets mankind have his way. Then when the trumpet judgments come, it's going to be a world ruled by Satan. Do you remember in Matthew chapter 24? Now, by the way, the difficult part is figuring out where that 3.5 year break occurs in reference to these different judgments that's being played out on this earth. Later on, we'll talk more about that, but there's debate between the commentators. Some say that the first 3.5 years will cover the period of time known as the seal judgments, and then the trumpet judgments and the vial judgments will cover the last 3.5 years. Some say, no, that's not it at all. It's in the middle of the trumpet judgments, because you have 4 trumpet judgments that indicate war, and then you have 3 trumpet judgments that indicate woe. And so those 3 trumpet judgments that indicate woe is when the Antichrist raises up and Satan empowers him. Others say, no, it's not until after the trumpet judgments and start of the vial judgments. I don't really know, but I'm inclined to think that it comes somewhere in the middle of the trumpet judgments when we get into the woe trumpets found in Revelation chapter number 9. Now, have I just completely lost everybody altogether? I don't know. But remember in Matthew chapter 24, the disciples asked the Lord a question that we're all familiar with. They said, tell us, when shall these things be? Remember, they took him on the tour to show him the building of the temple and all of that stuff. And he says, there's coming a day when there'll not be one stone left upon another that shall not be cast down. And so they got interested, and they said, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world, as the King James says, literally the end of the age? And his answer actually lasts through the 24th and 25th chapter of the book of Matthew, really, to the answer to that question. Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? Well, part of that answer, of course, he talked about wars and rumors of wars and famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places and all those things. Part of that is when he gets into talking about the tribulation period, he says this in verse number 15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, and whoso readeth, let him understand. Let them which be in the Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Then he says this, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. In other words, he says, this is going to be the great tribulation time. And by the way, the first part of the tribulation period is going to be bad enough. I think even the first part of tribulation is going to be like nothing we have seen in the opening of the seal judgments. And it's going to be, in fact, they cry out. And by the way, I believe that personally, that they happen in sequence from the seal judgments. I don't believe they all happen at the same time as some believe. Some believe that the seal judgments begin at the beginning, take you all the way to the end of the tribulation. Then you go back and you have the trumpet judgments. They back to the beginning, take you to the end. Then you go back and you have the vial judgments. There's some good men that believe that. I disagree. I think they happen in sequence. And I think they build in intensity and in severity until we get to the unadulterated wrath of God that's in the vial judgments, you see. But the seal judgments are bad enough. They're going to cry out, mountains fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and the wrath of the Lamb. So that's bad stuff. But, man, when you read some descriptions, and we will some of it tonight, the worst of it will come next time. When you read the description of some of the trumpet judgments, we have never, ever seen anything like that on this earth. So it is increasing in intensity. Again, the difficult part is when you read the 8th chapter, you have 4 judgments. The 9th chapter, you have 3. That's called the Woe Judgments. Just to give you a sample, verse 12 of the 9th chapter, 1 woe is passed, and behold, there come 2 more woes. You read over in the 11th chapter, 2 woes are passed, and the 3rd one is to come. And then the 7th trumpet blows. That is the 3rd woe, which are the vial or the bowl judgments that happen in Revelation chapter 16. And around and around and around we go. So it's difficult to follow sometimes, but I hope you can stay with me. Just focus in on these trumpet judgments. Anyway, last time we were in Revelation chapter 7. It was a parenthetical chapter. It means, again, it didn't advance the narrative. God just stopped and described something. In this case, he described the sealing of the 144,000 Jewish preachers, virgin male Jews, that God had sealed and protected upon this earth. We talked about 3 main things. It talks about first, God's providential control or protection of these servants of his. God says, listen, you cannot touch the earth, you cannot hurt the earth until I seal my servants. Kind of shows you who's in charge. Now, God lets man think he's in charge under the seal judgments. He lets the devil think he's in charge under the trumpet judgments. But he shows who really is in charge under the vial judgments. God is in charge. You can't do anything until I seal my servants. And then we talked about God's personal claim on his own. And that is that during the tribulation period, you're not only going to have these 144,000 preachers, but there's going to be a number that no man can number, both Jew and Gentile, that are going to be saved through their ministry. And then we talked about God's promised reward for these. They're going to be regarded. They're going to be rewarded. God has special rewards for these individuals. Anyway, we come to chapter number 8, and it is the beginning of the trumpet judgments. Now, again, keep in mind, the rapture's occurred. The saints of God are in heaven. Many of the Jewish and Gentile believers that have been saved by the preaching of 144,000 by this time have been martyred. Maybe most, because, man, they are standing in Revelation 7 before the throne in white robes, you know. They are the redeemed of God. In chapter 7, we have that the comfort, the assurance. We have that scene in heaven, and then we come back down to earth in chapter 8. That's the cycle in Revelation. You have a scene in heaven, and then you come crashing back down to the earth. Chapter 7 has hallelujahs in heaven. Chapter 8 has horrors upon this earth. Chapter 7, God's saints are comforted. Chapter 8, God's war is going to be intensified upon this earth. Now here's what happens. Chapter 7, as I said, brings us comfort in the midst of the calamity and chaos and confusion of the seal judgments. Chapter 8 shows us how the devil, folks, takes charge, seemingly, on this earth. The seal judgments is a world ruled by man. The trumpet judgments is a world ruled by Satan. Now, I like John Phillips' outline that he gives of the trumpet judgment. May help you a little bit and divide it up. But in John Phillips' commentary, he says in verses 1 through 6, we have what is recorded in preparation for the trumpets. We're going to touch on that just briefly because it's a very solemn occasion. There's some ceremony that takes place. And actually it happens every time God gets ready to judge this earth. There is what's recorded in preparation for the trumpets. Then in verse 7 through the end of chapter 9, we have what's recorded in particular about those trumpets. That's the difficult part. And then from chapter 10, really up through chapter 13, maybe you might say even through chapter 15, what's recorded in parentheses about those judgments, because that's where God pauses and starts to describe some things that actually takes place during the trumpet judgments. Now, they look back. You say, why do you say that? Chapter 12 talks about the devil being kicked out of heaven. That's going to happen during the trumpet judgments. The devil's being kicked out of heaven, and when he does, he's going to play that trump card. He's going to empower the beast, the Antichrist, and give him a power that's second only to God, if you really think about it. He's going to be fully empowered by the devil. Folks, he's going to be able to do miracles. God's going to allow him to do that. And it's going to be a world that is ruled by Satan. Anyway, it took me a long time to set that up, but we come to chapter 8, and the first part of this, it is preparation. Now, there's 4 notable things that take place. Number 1, there is a silent pause in verse 1. I don't know why it is. Verse 1 does something to me. He says, and when he had opened the 7th seal, do you see the connection between the seal and the trumpets? The trumpets and the vials are actually rolled up in the seal judgments. When he opens that 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. I thought about that silence. Carla sung this morning, be still and know that I am God. It does something to me that what is about to take place on this earth, even for the saints in heaven, is something so solemn and so sobering, so serious, that they don't utter a word. In fact, I think this is one of the few times you'll find in the Word of God that there's absolute silence in heaven. That means, do you remember Isaiah's prophecy of the throne room of God, and John's prophecy in Revelation chapter 4? Man, it's a place of constant activity. It's a place of worship. There's singing and worship's going on all the time. You have Isaiah, he saw the cherubims. Each one of them had 6 wings. With twain they covered their face. With twain they covered their feet. With twain they did fly. And day and night, if I could say it that way, in other words, constantly, they're crying, holy, holy, holy. But all of a sudden that stops. There is absolute silence because of what's about to take place on this earth. Do you ever think about it that way? So we have a silent pause, and then the second thing, we have a very solemn preparation. Verse 2 said, I saw 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Let me say this. Even though I must confess, I don't like a lot of ritualism, especially the ritualism we see in Catholicism and other groups that branched off the Catholic Church. Folks, ritualism will do no good so far as your salvation and your righteousness goes. It doesn't add anything to it. But let me say this. God is a God of ceremony. There is an order. I don't think our service ought to be pandemonium. I don't think it should be anything goes. There should be an order to our service because God always has order. And so he points out he has these 7 angels with these 7 trumpets. Bounce down to verse 6. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets, they prepared themselves to sound. I could chase a rabbit trail. Where I come from in the mountains of West Virginia, we had the old regular Baptist. Sandy knows about that, and Janice knows about that. And those preachers don't prepare themselves to sound. In other words, they just believe you just open up your Bible and God fills your mouth. And usually he fills it with the same stuff over and over and over again. But God is a God of ceremony. They prepared. There was a preparation made. So we have that very solemn preparation. And then the third thing I see is the saints' prayers in verse 3 and 4. I love these verses. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which is before the throne. And the smoke of that incense, which came out with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hands. Now, I tell you folks, I wonder sometimes if we really understand how important our prayers are. I think sometimes we mumble, we got our pat prayers, and we don't understand those prayers is pictured as ascending up to God. God loves to hear us pray. He does. Now, with that in mind, then verses, I think I have verse 9 through 13. I think it's an error. Actually, from verse 6 through 13, we get into the meat of the 7 trumpets. So let me read all of this to you, and we'll come back and touch on a few things. Verse 6 says, and the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. And the second angel sounded, and a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were on the sea and had life died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star was called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Now, just for the sake of time, I'm going to leave verse 13 and talk about it in a moment. Now, here is what I want you to see in these seal judgments again, or in these trumpet judgments. Just like the seal judgments, they're broken up into 2 sections, 4 in the first, 3 in the second. The first 4 is trumpets of war found in the 8th chapter. The next three, the last three, are trumpets of woe. The first four, God intensifies his war upon this earth over that of the sealed judgments. And then as a result of that, you have the three woe judgments. Now, the first four is what we're going to touch on quickly, and I'm watching the clock. In these four judgments, you have first a brewing storm, secondly, a boiling sea, thirdly, a banished star, and then a blackened sky. Those four things. Now, notice first we have a brewing storm. Verse 7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Now, let me pause right here. Here's the difficult part. Should we take these things literally? I mean, or are they symbolic? I mean, when it talks about hail falling that's mingled with fire and blood, should we take that literally? And when it talks about a third part of all the trees and grass was burned up, should we take that literally also? Now, the struggle is that among premillennialists, which I am one, we really always push for a literal translation of the scriptures unless it is very clearly indicated to be symbolic. When you read something like as it were or as unto, we say, nope, you got to take it absolutely literal. However, as I pulled down the commentators off the shelves, and I even looked at some premillennial writers, some of them felt at liberty to say, no, that's not really talking about a hailstone falling from heaven that's both on fire and mingled with blood. Rather, that's talking about a great upheaval of the nations of this earth. It should be taken symbolic. And when it talks about a third part of the grass, that grass is representative of people. They're going to be mowed down like wheat. And I read that, and I said, we fuss about the amillennialists taking liberties with the scriptures, and many premillennialist writers take liberties I don't think they ought to take. When I was first saved, how many of you have heard of Jack Van Impe? You heard of Jack Van Impe? I know some of you my age or older know who Jack Van Impe is. When I was first saved, Jack Van Impe was the thing. He was it. If you wanted to listen to prophecy, everybody recommended you listen to Jack Van Impe. And Jack Van Impe, what he did when he read all these things, he automatically, especially when you get into the vial judgments, he automatically interpreted them being as nuclear war. Of course, the Bible talks about, folks, Russia does come down from the north, China does come from the east, and he talks about a gigantic nuclear war that's going to take place. And so all these things are symbolic, maybe, of a nuclear bomb. God don't need no nuclear bomb. In fact, I think he's going to do it in a way and in a fashion that people are going to know that it's God that's doing this thing. If somebody shoots a nuclear warhead at us, they can just brush it off and say, well, that's just the fortunes of war. No. They're going to know it's God doing it. So I somewhat think that I take the track that it's literal. If the Bible says here, man, a hailstone falls out of heaven on fire, mingled with blood, I take that quite literal. If it says that a third part of the grass and the trees are going to be killed off, I take that quite literally. You say, well, man, that's crazy. Nothing like it ever happened. You're right. In Daniel chapter number 12, here's what it says. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, and everyone that shall be found written in the book. Daniel says, you know what? There's going to come a time on this earth, man, ain't nothing like that ever happened before. Right? Now listen to what it says again. I take it quite literal. There followed hail and fire mingled, he said, with blood. Now, we're familiar with hailstones. I don't have time to turn there, but you go over and read Joshua chapter number 10. You remember when the Confederation of Kings came up against Gibeon. Gibeon hollers at Joshua, come and help us. Joshua goes over, and the Lord intervenes and rains down hailstones on that army, that Confederation. In fact, he says they killed more people with hailstones than the Israel did with a sword. You've been caught in a hailstorm? I've been caught and hit. I didn't have a hat on. There was hailstones about that big, and it will send you running. Imagine a gigantic hailstone mingled with fire and blood, and it falls. And here's what happens. He says, as a result of that, a third part of the world's vegetation is going to be destroyed. Now, think about this. How many of you are inconvenienced right now because of the supply chain issues? I thought about this today. You go, Belinda could not find my special seasoning flour that I like to fry my deer meat in. I'm in bad shape. It's an inconvenience. You go into the store and it's getting more and more limited and more expensive. What you do find. Magnify that many times over when a third part of the world's vegetation, I can't talk, is destroyed. So you have this brewing storm in verse number 7. And then secondly, we have a boiling sea. Verse number 8 says, and the second angel sounded as it were, and a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. The third part of the creatures which were in the sea had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now, by the way, I'm going to sound like I'm going to contradict myself. We are at liberty, in this case, perhaps to spiritualize somewhat. What does he mean when he's talking about a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea? Now, I won't spiritualize it the way that some of our brethren spiritualize it. He talks about a great nation rising up out of the sea of nations and stuff like that. I don't think that at all. But I'm at liberty here because notice the wording. He says, second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain. He didn't say a great mountain fell into the sea. He said, as it were. Most commentators think it was perhaps a specially designed meteor. I don't know. That's cast into the sea. But if that's the case, the effects are not symbolic because a third part of the oceans are contaminated. It's going to get worse, isn't it? A third part of the sea life dies off, and a third part of the ships are destroyed. Can you imagine what it's going to be like on earth at this time? You move on. Number 3, we have this banished star. Verse 10, third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven. Now, again, notice the wording. It's not talking, it didn't say as it were a great star. You say, you mean you actually believe? Again, I think it's more in the fashion of a meteor or something of that fashion. A great star fell from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of the waters. And the name of the star is called wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, again, not just the ocean waters, but a third part of the fresh water is poisoned. By the way, that word wormwood is interesting in the Greek. There's actually a species of plant that does grow in Palestine that is called wormwood, and it's poisonous. It makes things bitter. It talks about bitterness and calamity and things like that. And a third part of the rivers and the fresh water are made bitter, and many people die from drinking of that. That's number 3. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten. We have a blackened sky. And the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Now, I want you to understand, think about what he's saying. By the way, he didn't say as it were or like unto. You say, you really think that literally a third part of the sun is going to be smitten? It's going to be blackened. I sure do. Third part of the stars, third part of the moon. And when he says, the day shone not for a third part of it. So we're going to have, we're going to be in glory, but there's going to be about 16 hours, a 16-hour day, basically, all told, if you go third part. Can you imagine what that will be like up on this earth? When that happens, you take all these together. I think the earth is going to be looking, it's going to be ripe for someone that's going to fix this thing. There's going to come a Superman on the scene that has all these seemingly magical powers and miraculous powers. And they're going to follow him. They're going to forget about the Lamb, and they're going to start worshiping the beast. Imagine if you were there and you saw all this happening, and this Superman comes on the scene. And that leads us into the 3 remaining trumpet judgments, which is called the Woe Judgments. Again, he says in verse number 12 of the 9th chapter, 1 woe was past, and behold, there come 2 woes more thereafter. In the 11th chapter, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. God's going to listen to what he says. Verse 13 of chapter 8, and I'll close. And I'll show you that I'm always right. And I beheld, this is after the 4th angel sounded, and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpets and of the 3 angels which are yet to sound. It's going to get worse, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to get worse. There are hallelujahs in heaven, but folks, there's going to be horrors upon this earth. Whew, I'm done. Go ahead and come on up here, Bo.